Coming up on the program this morning, this fall, we are seeing new dietary guidelines for the school nutrition program, including the school lunch program, and they are designed, I guess, to provide healthier food to kids, high schoolers, grade schoolers, on down the line. But it would appear, at least on the surface, that some agricultural commodities may not be treated very fairly under these new guidelines. We're going to talk about that, and we will get the take of two people this morning who will be joining me on the Ag Issues program. They work with agricultural commodities, in fact, two of the biggest commodities here in the state of Kansas, Cindy Falk with Kansas Wheat and Audrey Monroe with the Kansas Beef Council. That's what's coming up this morning on the Ag Issues program. This is Ag Issues on 580 Radio, and I am joined this morning by two ladies. They are both nutritionists representing some major Kansas agricultural commodities. Joining us from the Manhattan area is Cindy Falk with Kansas Wheat. Cindy, good morning.
Good morning, Kelly.
Glad to have you with us. Been a long time since we've had you on this program. And also joining us on the program this morning is Audrey Monroe. She is a nutritionist with the Kansas Beef Council. Audrey, good morning.
Good morning, Kelly.
All right. The reason I have the two of you on is because we have new dietary guidelines for school nutrition programs that really took effect, I guess, July 1st this year. These are more or less mandatory guidelines, and were part of the Healthy, Hunger-Free Kids Act that was passed by Congress to combat obesity and is being implemented by the USDA. Audrey, first to you, and we'll get into some of the specific serving rules that are included in these new guidelines, these new dietary guidelines. But is that why Congress implemented this? Was the sole purpose to combat obesity?
Well, Kelly, that's right. These, like you said, were implemented as a key component of the Healthy, Hunger-Free Kids Act, which you know was championed by First Lady Michelle Obama as part of her Let's Move campaign, and then was signed into law by President Obama. And one thing that I think is interesting is that USDA updated its meal patterns for the National School Lunch and School Breakfast programs to align them with the dietary guidelines for Americans, which is actually required by law. So that was the reason for these changes.
All right. Cindy, what happens if schools don't? Do you know what happens if schools don't follow these guidelines?
I believe that they are not reimbursed for their meals. So pretty much they will be following the guidelines. And yes, the changes are in line with the dietary guidelines for Americans, and they're based on recommendations made by the Institute of Medicine and, other reliable research-based studies.
All right, Audrey, let's go back to you. I'm going to read here because food service directors with school districts all over Kansas, probably all over the country, trying to make parents aware of what these are. And when parents read some of these, they may not be very happy, especially if they're an agricultural producer. Let's look at what's going on insofar as meat. If you're in high school, grades 9 through 12, the maximum amount of meat, this is all types of meat. It could be beef, it could be pork, it could be poultry. The maximum amount of meat that you can include in the school lunch, for instance, is 12 ounces per week. That does not sound like very much.
Well, and Kelly, it's important to remember that amount of meat, and it's actually included in a class called meat alternates, which meat alternates include things like cheese, yogurt, dry beans, peas, eggs, peanut butter, nuts, and seeds. So that class of foods actually is pretty identical to previous requirements as far as the recommended amount. And let me explain that in a minute. So in years past, what we had only a minimum amount for meat and meat alternates. That minimum amount was 1.5 to 2 ounces from that group per day, which equated to, if you do the math over a 5-day school week, about 7.5 to 10 ounces per week. And so, like you said, the new meal pattern sets both minimum and maximum requirements for meat and meat alternates during lunch. And depending on the grade level, those vary. For grades K through 5, it's about 8 to 10 ounces. Similar for grades 6 through 8. And then, like you said, for those high schoolers, it's 10 to 12 ounces per week. So depending on how the particular school chose to implement those requirements in the past, this could be seen actually as an increase in meats offered in the school lunch program, or it may be a decrease.
Just depends on the school.
It does depend on the school, because meat is lumped into that category with meat alternates. So the schools do have the ability to choose whether they offer something like nutrient-rich lean beef, or whether they offer something like eggs, beans, or peanut butter. So there is some choice within that category, and so we actually could see things like nutrient-rich lean beef increase, or we could see a decrease. And as a registered dietitian, I think these new, I know that you haven't gotten there yet, but the calorie limits for the different grade levels actually give beef a really unique opportunity, because schools are going to be trying to fit the most nutrition into those calorie limits. And as you and I know, beef provides a lot of nutrition for very few calories, so it's a great opportunity for our product.
So you don't think the glass is half empty, you think it's half full?
I think it depends on how you look at it. I like to look at it as half full, and I like to look at this as an opportunity to really educate about our product, because individual schools do have that flexibility to choose what they offer within that entire group. And so this is a great opportunity for me as a registered dietitian to continue those conversations with the people who manage those school lunch programs and work hard every day to feed our kids. And so for me, it's a glass half full situation.
Got it. All right, Cindy Falk, the same maximum applies to grains and breads. Cannot exceed, for a high schooler, for instance, cannot exceed 12 ounces on a weekly basis, and 51% of that may be whole grain. How does that compare with the previous guidelines?
Well, we're just happy that grains are still a required component, in every school lunch. And so, yeah, there's a minimum of 1 grain unit required for that grades K through 8, and then 2 grain units for grades 9 through 12. The new thing is the new meal pattern has a maximum limit in weekly grain quantities. So, grain amounts are now specified, and previously the meal pattern set a minimum quantity of 12 grain units for grades K through 6 and 15 grain units for grades 7 through 12. So there was only a minimum to meet, but school sponsors, could offer more. So now there's that specific ranges for each age group. And the new ranges are like 8 to 9 grain units for K through 5, 8 to 10 grain units for grades 6 through 8, and 10 to 12 grain units for grades 9 through 12. And, a grain unit is 1 ounce. So that would be like 1 slice of bread or half a cup of cooked pasta or cooked cereal. So these limits, were established to help control the minimum and maximum calorie limits in the new meal pattern. Before, the old requirements just encouraged whole grains. But since July 1 of this year, at least half the grains offered must be whole grain rich in the lunch program.
You answered a question that I was going to ask you, and that is, are pastas would be considered part of the bread group, right?
Yes.
Yeah, so they would fall under these guidelines as well.
That's right. But half of the grains offered must be, they're saying, whole grain rich in the lunch program. But in the year 2014-15, all grains offered must be whole grain rich in both the lunch and breakfast programs. So, and to receive the credit in the meal programs, a whole grain rich food must contain at least 50% whole grains, and then the remaining grain content of the product must be enriched. So, you can serve a really nice product with 50% whole grains. I've helped School Food Service over the years develop some recipes, and it can be a tasty product. So they're just asking.
bottom line, and we need to take a break here. Bottom line, Cindy, is your take is this treats the bread and the wheat group fairly.
Yeah, yes. I mean, we've lost a few servings, okay? We've lost about 3-ounce equivalents for the week because they've cut calories. But we came out pretty good. We're going to lose some grain servings. That's a few bushels of wheat, but the grains are still a required component. And I think the whole grain rule